We acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent, whose culture is the oldest living culture in human history. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and we respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. They share the memories, traditions and hopes of the traditional ancestors with the new generations today and in the future. We would also like to thank them for looking after this land for thousands of years.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to SciFest 2023. Where are we? It's our last session of the week, 15 amazing sessions that we've done, and over 12,000 students participating across the week. So thank you everyone that's been involved and made SciFest a success. So today our final session is from Danielle from Sydney Olympic Park, talking about innovations in sustainability. So I'll pass on to you, Danielle.
Thank you very much, Karen. And I'd just like to thank Virtual Excursions Australia and SciFest for having Sydney Olympic Park Authority along today as the last session for SciFest for the week. So I'm going to be talking about technology and innovation at Sydney Olympic Park and how technology and innovation assists us to be sustainable. Okay, so just an introduction. My name's Danielle Lego and I'm the team leader of education at Sydney Olympic Park Authority, and education at the park plays a major role in sustainability, and we deliver school excursion programs for students from K to 12 every year through our beautiful parklands and our urban centre. I would not like to acknowledge that Sydney Olympic Park is on Wongal country, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also to pay my respect to my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today for this presentation. So before we launch into talking about sustainability at Sydney Olympic Park in the current day, I'd like to just take you back and speak a little bit about the changes that have taken place here at Sydney Olympic Park over the last 200 years after British arrival. So we had a colonial arrival in 1788 that changed the landscape dramatically. And what we had was the delivery of land grants to British settlers, and that changed the landscape in that they were doing they were looking for arable land and fresh water up in this area near Parramatta, and that resulted in homesteads as well as Australia's first racecourse. It also saw the practices of salt harvesting for meat curing, as well as a tannery. So a number of different colonial industries there at the time. Now, coming into the 1900s, we had a range of different industries that were developed on site as a result of Sydney's growing population. And one of those was the abattoir. So the abattoir was the largest abattoir in the Southern Hemisphere, and it could slaughter up to 20,000 head of cattle a day in its peak in the post-war boom. Now, that was decommissioned in 1988 officially. However, during its time of operation from 1910 through to 1988, it also had an impact on our surrounding wetlands and waterways, whereby a lot of the waste from the abattoir was polluting those waterways and also damaging our wetlands to the point where a lot of eutrophication was taking place and a lot of algal blooms and fish kills as well in the likes of Homebush Bay, Haslam's Creek and Powell's Creek. We also had another industry, and that industry was the armoury. So it's now Newington Armoury, and it was in operation from 1897 through till 1988. And it was used to store armaments from the US, from the British and Australian Navy ships that were in Sydney Harbour at the time. One of the impacts to the surrounding environment was the disposal of armaments that were damaged when they came into the armoury, and they were disposed of into the wetlands and the salt marsh areas. And as a result of that disposal of those armaments, we now actually have a thriving salt marsh community because we're not allowed to develop on the site as a result of possible unexploded ordnance there. Then we also had, during the 1900s, from 1910 again through to 1988, we had the brickworks. So the brickworks were producing bricks in order to build homes and commercial buildings throughout Sydney. There was many brickworks across Sydney, and the geology of this area was perfect to make our red clay bricks. And this took place through from 1910 through to 1988. And as a result of the brickworks, we've ended up with a huge hole in the ground, which you can see down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, the brickworks were closed down in 1988, and a lot of the buildings were demolished at the time, just leaving behind this hole in the ground. There was also quite a bit of air pollution at the time, and many of the bricks that were unable to be used were dumped in the wetlands that were just adjacent to the brickworks. Now, during the 1950s and 60s, we had a lot of land reclamation where areas of water were changed into areas of land so that we could have the development of chemical industries on the shorelines of Homebush Bay. In doing this, the land reclamation caused the loss of almost 95% of salt marsh habitat and greatly fragmented the mangrove wetlands in and around Homebush Bay. The chemical industries moved in, and industrial and domestic waste was also buried across the park, and the waterways were used as dumping grounds. So during this time, the land and the waterways became heavily polluted. So that was what took place from 1788 right through till 1988. Just prior to that, in 1983, we did have the development of Bicentennial Park, which was an old Strathfield tip, so South Strathfield tip, and the State Rail wrecking yards as well. So that ended up becoming 100 hectares of green space in what was then to be added on as Sydney Olympic Park. And Bicentennial Park still stands today as a beautiful recreational space within the park itself. So in 1993, we became successful in our bid for the Olympic Games. And this is when the huge cleanup of the site took place. So the site was remediated by integrating ecologically sustainable development principles and practices. And it was at the time the largest urban renewal project in Australia. So this led to Sydney 2000 Olympic Games being known as the Green Games. Today, the environmental guidelines build on this Olympic legacy. And you can see here in the images, the image on the top shows the site where we had changed the landscape and consolidated a whole range of waste that was buried in the ground. And also in the bottom image, you can see some of the construction taking place for some of our other buildings just in front of the administration buildings for the abattoir. Those buildings still stand today, and they're an important part of Sydney Olympic Park's heritage story. So I'm going to speak to you a little bit about how we still utilise ecologically sustainable development policies and practices today. And also the energy efficiencies at Sydney Olympic Park, our recycled water use at the park, waste reduction, and ecological improvements. And I'm going to just go through a whole range of ways in which we use technology to become sustainable. So our buildings are green, not literally green, but they are developed using those ecologically sustainable development principles and practices that I spoke about earlier. So in 2019, the Sydney Olympic Park Authority actually achieved a six-star Green Star Communities rating for their whole precinct, which set a goal to achieve a net zero emissions for the Sydney Olympic Park Authority by 2030, and for the whole precinct to become net zero carbon emissions by 2050 through the development of a comprehensive greenhouse gas strategy. So I've just shown here in this slide 4 different venue developments on site. One is the Novotel. The Novotel is a hotel, and that has been designed in a way where this narrow edge here on the western side of the building faces west, which is the hottest time of the day, and this reduces the amount of heat that comes into the building, thus reducing the need for excessive air conditioning use. We also have louvers over the windows, and this also is like a passive solar design to assist again with reducing the amount of heat entering the building and reducing our need for power to electricity to power up our air conditioners within the building. We also have tinted windows on there, as well as the use of solar hot water on the roof. Now the stadium here, there's a huge expanse of roof. That roof captures rainwater and it actually stores it in large containers underneath the stadium, and then that water is utilised to irrigate the field. Then we've got the train station. The train station is a beautiful design of leaves all together as the design of the roof. So it has clear panels that you might be able to see there in the image. It has clear panels as the veins of these leaves, and that allows natural sunlight to come through onto the station, and it reduces the need for electrical lighting. It also has an elevated roof so that there's cross-flow ventilation, reducing the need for large extraction fans, and it also keeps the station at a comfortable temperature. And then we've got the arena. So the arena here, the really cool thing about that is that it has almost 10,000 phone books. Remember, we're using phone books back in the 1990s when these venues were built. It used old phone books in its roof for insulation. So they're just some of the sustainability principles and practices that we put in place for those venues. Now, we also have a very energy efficient park. So how is it energy efficient? As I mentioned previously, the precinct is aiming for net zero emissions and even to become carbon positive in the future, meaning that it will generate more energy than it needs, further reducing harmful carbon dioxide emissions. And one of the ways it will do this is with on-site power generation. So several on-site solar arrays are installed on buildings across Sydney Olympic Park. A 123-watt solar photovoltaic system is able to generate around 170,000 kilowatt hours per year. And that was installed on the roof of the P3 car park. Some of you might be familiar with that car park just near the Aquatic Centre and the Key Centre. It was installed in 2020, and you can see that in this image here to the right. Not only is that helpful in creating solar energy, but what it also does is it shades the cars that get to park up there underneath it. So it's multi-purpose. So this system that's in P3 car park is connected to our Sydney Olympic Park Authority's head office, and it's expected to reduce electricity costs by 50% and save 14 tonnes of carbon dioxide per month. And now a further 1.6 megawatt was installed in 2021 on the Aquatic Centre, and more on the Athletics Centre, and also on the recycled water treatment plant, saving a further 1,700 tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions annually. So what we can also see here are what we call the towers of power. You might be familiar with them lining the main thoroughfare at Sydney Olympic Park called Olympic Boulevard. Those towers of power have solar arrays on them, and they send power back into the electricity grid within Sydney, and that then also helps to light up our Olympic Boulevard at night. So as I just mentioned about those towers of power having sort of more than one purpose, when we have installations at the park, in order to be sustainable, these installations need to serve multiple functions. So an example of two multifunctional installations are the towers of power on the left-hand side and our Olympic cauldron here on the right-hand side. So the towers of power line Olympic Boulevard, as I mentioned, and they're a legacy of the Olympics. So they have the following features. They have solar panels sending energy back into the grid, as I mentioned. They create safely lit spaces down the main boulevard at night. They also create aesthetic appeal and interest, as the lighting can change colour depending on what event is taking place. And they also serve as educational tools because they have a range of different historical places related to the Olympics written on them, and a little bit of Olympic history related to different Olympic sites around the world. They also serve as a seating area and a meeting point and somewhere to seek shade. So they are the towers of power, and they are multi-purpose use. Now, the Olympic cauldron, some of you may remember that it sat atop our Stadium Australia, just up here across from where it is standing today. It's also another example of a multifunctional installation. So the cauldron is an icon of the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games, where Cathy Freeman held the torch and then lit that cauldron. It now serves as a sculptural installation in Cathy Freeman Park, and it has as well the Olympic and Paralympic medal winners inscribed around its base. It also serves as a water play area for visitors. We can see the water running down here now. It becomes a water feature that people can play in, and it also creates a cooling effect during hot days in the urban centre. So another wonderful multi-purpose installation. Part of our sustainable design is related to, water-sensitive urban design is related and very, very closely linked with our sustainable principles and practices on site. So throughout the development of the Olympic site back in the 1990s, from 1993 right through till when the Games opened in 2000, we actually engineered the catchments. So you can see in this left-hand image here, the blue area is one catchment area, and the arrows show the direction of runoff. The large blue arrow facing to the northwest, that is Olympic Boulevard, capturing a lot of runoff that is coming from the surrounding urban catchment areas, as you can see here. So we engineered our catchments in order to capture stormwater runoff and pollutants. We also have water capture on the roof of the stadium. We have permeable paving, and we have tree grates. So I'm going to talk a little bit through each of those in more detail. So just having a look at our catchments, water-sensitive urban design was integrated across the site. Catchments were engineered to capture stormwater runoff, to filter that runoff and send it to a series of man-made ponds along the park here to the northern area. These ponds were man-made, and they assist in filtering out excess nutrients as well as any solid pollutants, allowing them to settle out of suspension before that water is used in our water treatment plant, and also before it gets sent back into our local creeks. So venues like the stadium were also designed to capture water and reuse that rainwater, as we've mentioned. And across the urban centre, permeable paving has been used that allows infiltration of rainwater into the ground, replenishing the groundwater and keeping the ground moist and cool. And the tree grates allow tree roots to maximise the amount of water that they're getting during rain events, but still allowing the foot traffic over them without destroying the tree roots. So what we try and do at Sydney Olympic Park is mimic that natural water cycle of a small amount of runoff, but not too much runoff, allowing infiltration through our pavers, as well as capturing some of that runoff to use as recycled water. Now, one of our coolest streets in town. So how did we create the coolest street in town? So the coolest street in town is also part of our water-sensitive urban design, as it is literally 4 degrees cooler than any other urban street in Sydney Olympic Park, creating a cool, shaded, leafy green avenue for workers walking from the station to their office buildings. So the design features which I have here on this image as the yellow stars are as follows. So what we did was we lined the street with mature evergreen trees. We sloped the road down towards the gutter. So when it rained, the runoff would head down towards the gutter. But what you will notice is the gutter is not solid. The gutter has these gaps. That allows the rainwater to come down to the gutter, flow through it into what is called a rain garden. Within that rain garden, we then have mulched soil so that we have increased infiltration of runoff, and we have all of these native grasses. The native grasses take up excess nutrients and also utilise the water as part of an irrigation system for them. So what we're trying to do here is reduce the amount of runoff that ends up down the drains and into our stormwater canals. Now, how we go about saving 1 billion litres of water every year at Sydney Olympic Park. So we do that through a process called RAMS, which is our Water Reclamation and Management Scheme. So RAMS collects the process of RAMS, collects, stores and treats stormwater and wastewater for reuse, for non-potable uses, for urban development and irrigation within Sydney Olympic Park and the adjacent areas, one of them being what was the Olympic Village that is now known as the suburb of Newington, adjacent to the park. So how does this work? So runoff and secondary effluent from the local sewage plant is sent back to the reclamation plant to be filtered, and then that filtered water is sent back out to our venues, to our residential towers and office buildings to be used for toilet flushing, for use in washing machines, for use for irrigation, and also for use in our large air conditioning units in the park. So you can see the images there. Up the top here, our grey water or recycled water is through the purple line here. And that is what can be used for what we consider non-potable use. So it can't be used in the shower or anywhere where we have sort of almost primary contact with it. It can't be used for cooking or in the kitchen. But it can be used for all those other uses: irrigation, toilet flushing, and in our laundries. So that is how we go about saving 1 billion litres of water every year at Sydney Olympic Park. Now, waste management, another really important aspect of sustainability. When we build infrastructure at the park, like our boardwalks, our bridges and our seating, we are now using recycled materials in the form of composite plastics. Not only is that good for minimising waste, but it's also very good in terms of maintenance. So these plastics don't have to be sanded back. They don't deteriorate like wood does. And so we're reducing the costs related to maintenance and replacement of the old wooden products. Also, when we do any gardening around the park, which there's a lot of it, we reuse felled branches as ground habitat. So you can see down there that bottom image of a whole lot of pile of logs. That's been put there purposefully to create habitat for things like reptiles and insects around the park. We also mulch our green waste and reuse that across the site as mulch. And one of the latest things that we've been doing in regards to waste management is a trial on our what we call smart bins. So these smart bins are actually, they're new solar bins, and they have a number of benefits, including eliminating the overflowing of bins, reducing carbon emissions and traffic congestion, utilising renewable solar cell energy, and they also reduce pest species like birds getting into the bins, rats and mice, and also they dramatically improve the cleanliness of public spaces. So what happens is that these bins use solar power to compact the waste that goes into them. And they then use Wi-Fi to communicate back to the waste collection depot. So when the bin is full and ready for collection, that is when the trucks will come out to the park and they will then collect the rubbish. And what we saw during that trial was the reduction of the waste management trucks from 89 visits in 1 month down to just 9 visits in 1 month. So that's really incredible. So that means that there's less traffic on the road, there's less carbon emissions, there's less noise pollution as well. So there's a lot of added benefits to these smart bins. Now, using technology to protect our most precious assets, being one, the green and golden bell frog. So some of you may know the green and golden bell frog as an iconic, as an icon from the Sydney Olympic Games. So we continue to manage the habitats of the green and golden bell frog so that they can thrive at Sydney Olympic Park. They are an endangered species. And one of the ways that we've done that is by doing a microchip monitoring of them. So we have teamed up with universities, and a tiny microchip is placed in the thigh muscle of the frogs. This allows us to track where they are actually traveling to during their lifetime. And that data can then better inform where we focus our energies on reviving and improving and maybe creating more habitat space for the frogs. What we also have in order to protect our frog species is a drainage system in an area of the park called Narrowang Wetlands. Having this drainage system, which is this image down the bottom here, allows us to drain the ponds in Narrowang Wetland in order to kill off introduced pest species called mosquito fish or gambusia. Now, the reason that we do that is because the mosquito fish actually prey on the tadpoles of our green and golden bell frogs. And when they do that, it reduces the number of our frogs that then make it into adulthood. So this is one way in which we use technology and create a safe place for our endangered species. The other thing that we've done is we've actually created around 20 underpass tunnels so that the frogs can travel underneath our roadways and prevent becoming victims of passing traffic. So they are some of the things that we implemented both before and after the Olympic Games, and we continue to work on protecting the green and golden bell frog today. Now, another way that we use technology to protect our most precious assets is by installing what's called a smart gate. So the smart gate is located at the Waterbird Refuge. The Waterbird Refuge, we have an aerial photo of it here, is in the southern area of Homebush Bay and just to the north of Bicentennial Park in an area of wetlands called the Badu. Now, what we had for the last 30 years after land reclamation was basically a huge pond that was laying stagnant. And that pond wasn't able to be utilised by waterbirds because there was too much algae and there was no food and no habitat available for the waterbirds. And in particular, we had migratory birds in and around visiting this area. So we asked for a grant of approximately $200,000 from the government that was granted for us to restore the tide into this area. And we did this by putting in place what we call the Smart Gate. So the Waterbird Refuge Tidal-Gate or Smart Gate is a computerized dam wall that has restored tidal flow to the waterbird refuge. So the Smart Gate opens in response to the rising tide in Homebush Bay, allowing the tide to flow in via the culvert under the wall, and then close again, holding the water in, and then reopening to allow the tide to flow out, simulating the natural tidal flow. So this important piece of wetland management infrastructure was built in 2006. And essentially what it does is it enables us to manipulate the water levels in the waterbird refuge. So, as I mentioned before, we have visitors flying all the way from the northeastern areas of Asia, being our beautiful migratory shorebirds. These migratory shorebirds can travel up to 15,000 kilometres all the way down to southeastern areas of Australia. And this is an area where they love to come and end their journey and stay here during our summer when their wetlands are frozen over. So what we can do using the Smart Gate or the tidal gate, we can actually vary the tidal limit. And we can see here on the diagram that our summer tidal variation is greater than our winter tidal variation. And what that does, this light pink area in here is mudflat. So it exposes mudflat by keeping tidal levels quite low in summer so that our migratory birds can feed on all the organisms that they find in the mud in the waterbird refuge. This enables them some wonderful feeding habitat so that they can fatten up and fly back home at the end of our summer when their wetlands are ready to be used as breeding grounds again. We also have international management agreements with China, Japan, and Korea, and they are the Chinese-Australian Migratory Bird Agreement, or CAMBA, and the Japan and the Korean-Australian Migratory Bird Agreement. So this is another important piece of technology that has allowed us to improve our biodiversity of the area and to also protect endangered species who are visiting the park. And finally, so technology saves every drop. So what is this SIMPACT? SIMPACT is one of the latest pieces of technology that we're using at the park. SIMPACT stands for Smart Irrigation Management for Parks and Cool Towns. And the technology consists of soil moisture probes that provide data to better inform irrigation practices around the park. So this data will assist in reducing irrigation for all of our many parkland areas, and this therefore reduces water usage and obviously cost as well. Now, in the future, SIMPACT will go beyond just providing soil moisture data. It will also be able to monitor atmospheric conditions across the park. And this will be available in the form of a publicly accessible phone app so that people can actually find the coolest place to visit when they come to Sydney Olympic Park on a hot summer's day. So they are just some of our many different sustainable practices that I can talk about over the this period of the last 40 minutes. If you would like more information on any of the sustainable practices at Sydney Olympic Park, you can visit our website, sydneyolympicpark.com.au. There are many different documents that you can read. And if you want to get in touch with us at Education, you can just email us at education@sopa.nsw.gov.au. So I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation and learned a little bit more about how technology helps us be sustainable at Sydney Olympic Park. Thanks, Karen.
So much for that, Danielle. It's incredible the diversity of programs that are in place, the innovations that are in place for so many different areas of sustainability, looking at energy, water, and of course, as you said, the most precious assets, those amazing animals, and the mangroves themselves. So I've got a question that's come through. Where do you think, what's next? I know the expansion of the some of the systems, but what do you think 5 years, 10 years, the next innovation will be?
Oh, I think that, well, we've actually got the place vision, which is happening at the moment, and our master plan 2050. That will probably outline in greater detail what I think is going to happen. But look, I think that we are going to probably go down the track of possibly having things like maybe driverless buses. We are getting the metro, so that is coming in the future. That is the metro stations from Western Sydney through to the park, which is going to increase our public transport services to the park. And of course, that's very efficient, being using the technology of, I think that's the driverless metro trains there. So that's definitely coming. I would like to think that there's a lot more passive solar being designed in our, having more green buildings and seeing a lot more use of space that enables the growth of plants within and around buildings themselves, so that we have more green to be looking at within the park, within the urban centre of the park.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because of, so many multi-uses, that aesthetics, it looks nice, but it also helps cool the buildings as well. So
exactly.
Yeah, especially if we can use edible plants.
Yeah, that's right. So many different purposes for plants. Green roofs and things like that for our communities who are living in high-rise apartments.
Absolutely. And I've just got another question as well. Do you see any changes since Return and Earn came in with less sort of waste and those kinds of cans and bottle rubbish ending up in the waterways?
We have seen a lot of reduction of that sort of waste in the waterways. I don't have statistics on me, but just visually, there does seem to be a lot less cans that are around. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, that's good to see those kinds of initiatives, having on the ground consequences.
That's right. And we've got a Return and Earn station actually near the station at the park as well.
Oh, excellent. That's great news. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us for our final SciFest session. And we look forward to having everyone involved, and we'll have the recording for this coming out as well. So thank you everyone that's been part of SciFest 2023. It's been an incredible journey looking at innovation across the week. So please, keep an eye out for all the recordings. Even if you've missed sessions, you can go into the SciFest channel on Virtual Excursions Australia YouTube and see all of the recordings from all of the events this week. So thanks very much. Look forward to seeing you again soon. This National Science Week project is supported by the Australian Government and Inspiring Australia, and proudly brought to you by Virtual Excursions Australia.